Stage is yours.
Thanks, Andre, for your kind words. And as I'm the last speaker for today or tonight, well, I'd like to thank all the other speakers for their wonderful contributions. And bear with me, there are necessarily some overlaps from the other presentations, but I try to keep them as short as possible. As the title of this presentation suggests, especially the second portion of the title, why QA matters, this is about quality assurance, which we already have heard about a lot, but it's more about quality assurance in the entire MT workflow, which means it's not only about evaluating MT quality, but also evaluating your own resources, your human resources, your language resources, and stuff like that. To start things off, I'd like to start with a quote from Arle Lommel, which I've come across a lot these days, which is machine translation will only replace those humans who translate like machines. We still experience a lot of rejection from both from clients and from our fellow linguists and translators, because they are afraid that one day machine translation will replace what they are currently doing, delivering high quality translations. We are convinced that this is not the case. The current machine translation solutions are very powerful, but we still need the expertise of our fellow translators to deliver those high quality translations. So in our point of view, machine translation can be used in certain scenarios and deliver tremendous results. But in other cases where high quality and data security concerns are involved, we still rely on translators to do the post-editing. So the main objective and the main takeaway for this evening and this presentation should be, how can we assure human level quality in an MT-driven workflow scenario? I've prepared a few questions to begin with. Maybe these questions are also reflections of your own thoughts and concerns. Maybe you ask yourself, how can the use of MT speed up my processes and help me to achieve a substantial productivity gain? So your main focus in this case would be on productivity or efficiency. What MT technology is the best for me? Do I have the resources to develop a custom MT engine, or should I rely on an off-the-shelf solution? Probably because you're focusing on performance or ease of use. And the last point, do I need to revise my current QA strategy that I have for my translation workflows? And now I'm switching to MT-based workflows. So what aspects are important when it comes to working with MT-based workflows? Instead of presenting you with a quite linear top to bottom agenda, I think that when evaluating the whole MT workflow, it comes down to what I call the core components. So at first, we want to analyze our potential use cases and maybe do a breakdown of the requirements that are attached to these special use cases. And then we want to have a look into the workflows. What kind of workflows do I actually need? And the actual QA process that we have established is a circular one. So at first, you want to evaluate your resources. Then you want to somehow estimate your MT performance and identify for yourself if the MT performance might be sufficient for your workflows. Then there's this point of guiding the actors, which actually means that you have to have instructions and you have to build an MT strategy, actually write down an MT strategy for other persons who are involved to understand and grasp the idea that you're trying to implement. Measuring MT efficiency can be done with several methods. I will go into detail later on. Then the next step would be drawing conclusions. So what have we learned from our current MT workflow, and are there certain topics and areas that we can improve on? And the last point, of course, is identifying those key areas where I can make those improvements. When you have a look at our today's translation business or translation business landscape, there are a few possible use cases that you could come up with. I picked those randomly, but they actually are real representations of use cases that we have at STAR. For instance, a customer asked for a rollout of a group-wide help desk system used in multiple countries, and they want to have instant translation. So their German users want to translate into English for English users or English-speaking users in their other offices. Or we translate a series of comprehensive instruction manuals for a known car manufacturer. Or internally, we are carrying out a case study on the impact of translation technologies in a CAD-driven working environment. What all these use cases have in common is I have to do a breakdown of the requirements. So for instance, for the first use case, we want to have instant translations. So there can't be any delay with post-editing. We want to have frequent updates of the text. Imagine something like a knowledge base. Articles can change on the fly. So there is, every time there's a new request for a new translation, this has to be done instantaneously. So longevity of the translation would, for instance, not be a priority. Or you have multiple source languages, or you need to rely on pivoting languages, which means your translation has to go from German into English and then from English into Chinese. For the second use case, you want to have, as you're translating instruction manuals, which are going to be published, you want to have high quality translations, which might entail a complex terminology, which the workflow might comprehend a in-country review done by the offices of your client in the respective countries, and you have tight deadlines. Or in the third use case or case study, you would investigate the interplay of translation resources. So the focus is not on tight deadlines and producing high quality translations in no time, but it's rather seeing how your translation memories, your term bases, and your MT solution can harmonize and can be synced together. So your task would be to examine the workflow in all stages. You have to look at your input, you have to guide or create a process, and you have to evaluate the output. When we have a look at the different workflows in today's translation and localization businesses, of course, we have traditional translation, which has been replaced by computer-assisted translation, which, of course, since the beginning of the time when CAD tools were invented and developed, we have an interplay of different language resources that can assist the translator. Then we have machine-aided human translation with all these pretty abbreviations, MAHT. Then we have HAMT, which is human-aided machine translation. And then we have something that I'd like to focus on in this presentation, which is MT post-editing, with or without pre-editing. If we take it a step further, we have fully automatic useful translation and fully automatic high quality translation, which are both used in environments where there's no human interaction needed or wanted in the process, like the first use case I explained to you when implementing a translation solution in your knowledge base. What they all have in common, represented by this little arrow here, is that you can perceive an increase of automation. Depending on your specific needs, you might want to choose a different workflow, a more automated or a less automated workflow. To do this, you have to see what kind of time and resources are available for your project. What about the longevity of the translation output? The shelf life, so to say, the level of creativity needed for the assignment. Is it a literature translation? Is it a marketing campaign? Is it a transcreation project? Then you have to take into account the complexity of the subject matter, the expertise and the terminology that you can provide, and the terminology research that might be required for that project. You have to look at your CAD tool environment and your term bases and translation memories, and you have to make sure that the quality level for your translations, for your outcome, is defined, and that potential risks related to the translation errors are also documented. So as I said, when examining these workflows, we will focus on the MT post-editing workflow. As we've already heard, of course, MT post-editing is a workflow that involves several technologies. So you would have a translation memory, ideally with your CAT tool. You would have a terminology database, a translation editor where the editing is done, and then built-in or external QA tools. To sum this up a little bit graphically, you might know where this is leading to. This is a standard translation process that also involves MT. I'm not going into detail in this, but most of our clients who want to implement MT strategies, they come to me asking, where can I set a threshold for when the translation memory is used for the pre-translation and when the MT kicks in. And that's a very decisive factor. So whereas 100% matches and perfect matches get automatically pre-translated by using the TM, in certain scenarios, you have the possibility to choose for yourself where the threshold is. So if you set it lower for the fuzzy matches, for instance, less MT suggestions will be used, but more of the translation memory will be used. And this is one aspect that's also important for our QA implementation. Where is the sweet spot between the usability and efficiency of my translation memory and the efficiency and quality of my machine translation solution? The second thing is vendors. So you have to, if you're doing post-editing, of course, vendors have to comply to a certain profile. So they do have to show a certain level of overall proficiency, linguistic skills, knowledge of the subject matter. The ISO 18587, for instance, does have some sort of a definition for that profile. And what's more important is that post-editing skills need to be developed over time and adapted to the MT technology accordingly, because MT in some cases will produce errors. And the faster you can identify and correct these errors, the higher your efficiency will generally be. And for that matter, feedback culture is one more important aspect. And feedback should be an integral part of the MTPE process. So a rich feedback culture ensures that the translator's voices are heard and that automated evaluation metrics are complemented by this subject feedback, I'd say. The last point for consideration is knowledge management. So in order to involve everybody and in order to render the process more transparent, you have to provide clear guidelines for both the future post editors and your own project managers if you're working in an LSP environment. So you have to make sure that everybody knows why you're implementing those QA measures and everybody knows where to find this knowledge. So if you have a knowledge base or shared folders or a Confluence space or something like that, it's always good to have a dedicated place where you can go to find the information. And one thing that not every LSP is doing, but it would be recommended, is appointing a dedicated MT specialist, because from what I've done so far, also of course in the past, is that finding the right MT solution and re-evaluating your decisions is really time consuming, but you get the benefit from having someone who can do this full time. You might ask yourself a couple of questions. For instance, source text quality. Do my source documents follow any specific guidelines? Do I have a style guide or controlled language? Or could the source documents be further improved for use with MT? We've already heard about the notion of pre-editing. So just as a food for thought, I think that as MT post editing has become quite an established notion in our business, I think that it should be rather like something like augmented translation or MT assisted translation, because in the context of neural engines, you don't need pre-editing of texts as often as you used to need it in the context of a statistical machine translation. Then you have to ask yourself, what is the purpose of my translation? Who will read the translation? Is it intended for internal use only, or is it supposed to be published? what quality level am I aiming for? Or do I have other workflows like in-country reviews and transcreation that are linked to the MT post-editing workflow? Then you have to decide on the MT technology. So do I have a generic engine? Do I have a custom engine? We at Star, we also develop our own engines and develop engines for customers. But in certain scenarios, generic engines turn out to be more reliable and more efficient. And one important point, risk management. You have to ask yourselves, are there any life-threatening risks related to my source documents? We at Star have implemented some measures, even though, for instance, the client is not well aware of the risk related to his or her source documents. We at Star have certain, let's say, tables or checklists that allow us to really check if there's for instance, personal data in it. So the quality of the risk management evaluation is done on our side also. And do all processes involve comply with the prevailing data safety regulations? We've also heard about Blue score. I'm not going into detail because as we've said, the main takeaway is if you're doing Blue score evaluation in a process that is mainly MT post-editing focused, so productivity focused, Blue is not suitable for cross-domain comparison or comparison between different language combinations. But what you can do, because I saw earlier in the chat, I saw a question how added to the question is the text suitable for MT, a translation with MT from a data security standpoint. The question is also, is it useful at all to use MT for a specific project? For that matter, we have developed a method which is called a scale test with error annotation. So when receiving a new project from a client for which we don't really have a lot of experience for a specific MT language combination, we take a portion of this project from the project files, the most representative ones, more complex and simple, so a well-balanced mix of different segments, and we give them to our post editors who do not do the post editing, but who rate the MT output based on a scale from 1 to 4, with 4 being the best grade and 1 being the worst grade, so completely unusable. 4 would be only little to no editing needed for the post-editing task. And then the additional feature is they do an error category annotation, which means they give a score, and then they also give up to 2 error categories that they identified in the segment. And this will allow us to do what I call the error category distribution. So as you can see in this example, there have been a lot of grades in the area of 3 and 4, which means the MT output is generally usable and it requires less editing effort than like the other categories. But we can also see that in most of these categories, we find wrong terms. This is something which is to be expected when we use generic engines, for instance. And we use this method to do a quick comparison. Do we use MT or do we use human translation only? But this also helps us to improve our own engines by using this error category evaluation. And the last thing is post-editing distance. You might heard of it. Just as a side note, this screenshot was taken from a very nifty plugin called Post Edit Compare. For those of you who are working in the RWS Stratus Studio universe, this tool is completely free, and it will actually deliver a report on the productivity. So it actually measures how much effort is needed to convert the MT output, the raw MT output, into the translation that I want to have in the end. So Post Edit Compare, if anyone wants to download and test it, very helpful tool. The main letdown of the post-editing distance, while being super interesting for productivity or productivity related analyses, is it does not reflect the cognitive effort needed for the editing process. So if you combine the second and the third metric, you could potentially see correlations between the editing effort and the error categories. And then you can create a report which is based on both. So you can see, is it harder or does it take more time to edit a segment where there are a lot of terminology errors, or is it harder to and more time consuming to edit a segment where you have a lot of mistranslations, for instance. Then for your strategy, I recommend that you reshape the definition of your own QA. So the goal would be to create the confidence that the requested quality level can be reached by ensuring that all processes and resources are synchronized right from the beginning. So I mean, also the language resources. Are my translation memories well cleaned up? Are my glossaries well managed? Something like that. And in total, shifting towards a more holistic approach, which means post-editing for me should not be a way of saying I have an empty output and I let somebody fix it. So the delta between the empty output and the final product, but recognizing that there are mutual dependencies of all processes and resources involved. Your term bases, your translation memories, the way you guide your post editors by providing MTPE guidelines, things like that. And understanding machine translation as a work in progress, which helps you actually to develop clear strategies and visions without assuming that the perfect solution is right around the corner. To sum it up, what does all that mean for my actual MT strategy? So these are only recommendations, but these are recommendations which prove to be very helpful when we develop our own strategies. So provide clear machine translation post-editing guidelines to your translators and project managers. Every attempt to harmonize the process is a big win. Then explore the capabilities of your CAD tools or your CAD tool, depending on how many of them you are using. Most applications provide basic functions that can also be helpful for working with MT, like filters, regular expressions, etc., or support a variety of optional plugins for QA purposes. Revise your translation resources on a regular basis, which is a general recommendation, of course. But if, for instance, you opt for a custom MT solution, you have to clean your training data, and a well-managed DB is also a must. So whether you do it in-house or outsource it, the principle remains the same. Involve your company's vendor management right from the start, because pricing and quality levels for MTPE workflows should be 100% transparent. And a rather general recommendation is get involved and exchange ideas with other MT experts. There are plenty of options out there to help you find a suitable MT solution. This forum or tech talk included, of course, as a great opportunity, scientific studies, MT reports, etc. So as we've said, successful ingredients for an MTQA recipe would be to take something like a post-editing distance, an error annotation, and the feedback from your post-editors, and of course your internal MT dev teams, to objectively measure PE effort, which is also a key indicator for direct comparison with the fuzzy matches, as I explained on my second or third slide. So comparing the effort between MT segments and fuzzy match segments can be decisive. Error annotation, so correlations between the errors and the post-editing effort, and analyzing the impact of these errors. Feedback could be something like the time spent for the post-editing tasks, the post-editor's satisfaction with the MT quality, the overall satisfaction with the post-editing task, and suggestions for improvement are always welcome. So I'll skip the part of the error annotation. I just say that there are different metrics with a different level of granularity, like LISA, the J2450, or the TAUS TQF, and that error annotation in general is very important to understanding the flaws and the strength of an MT engine. If you want to know, you can also use this feature in Trados in conjunction with the post-edit compare. You can recreate your own translation quality assessment and add this quality evaluation feature to the MT post-editing workflow. So when drawing conclusions and finding the right ways to making improvements, let me just quickly sum up what you have to take into consideration. There are 6 key areas where you can improve your quality assurance strategy, which is QA tools and features. Look for an MT-ready software portfolio, which you most likely have with a CAD tool or with external QA software. Pick the right MT technology. Create a dynamic pricing model. Do not start by cutting down your post-editing rates by 50%, and let's say to your vendors say deal with it. But pricing should always be dependent on the actual quality and efficiency. Provide MTPE trainings. There are a lot of consultants out there who do MTPE trainings, but if you want to do it yourself, make sure that you have someone in place to do it. And extended research. As I said, get involved, exchange with other people. This will also help you to having other insights will also help you to improve on your own QA. So that would be it for my side. Thanks a lot for your attention, and yeah, feel free to reach out to me in the breakout rooms.